let's go through where things stand now in the Senate. You've got, if Democrats are going to find a way to pick up 4 seats, right, and somehow figure out how to win this Senate and how to sort of break the tie. Remember, they have to win 4 to get it, because if it's 50-50, JD Vance breaks the tie. Although, of course, the most fascinating thing might be if they get to 50-50, what does Lisa Murkowski do? But anyway, I'm jumping way ahead. I don't want to get to there. But wouldn't that be interesting if Lisa Murkowski decided to caucus with the Democrats if they find their 3 seats? So how do you get the Democrats to 3 Senate seats? The 3 Republican seats right now that look the most enticing to them. Number 1 now is North Carolina with a bullet, right? Right up there. This becomes an open seat. Seems like a very plausible place for them to go find victory. Then you have what's going on in Texas, where the Republicans are likely to nominate the weakest general election candidate they could find in Ken Paxton. He's a very polarizing figure. He makes Ted Cruz seem like a moderate. He's got all sorts of character and ethics issues. And I don't know if character matters anymore in American politics in Republican primaries. I think that's been pointed out, as John Cornyn himself said. He wanted to make this race happen to see if character mattered still in politics. Well, not in a Republican primary, it appears. And if Cornyn does not seek there and Paxton is the candidate, again, I think you will have it's a very similar situation where you may have a free John Cornyn voting however he feels like voting in ways that sort of make MAGA crazy, but become pretty appealing to swing voters and make it easy for Democrats to say, hey, don't you want to have somebody who votes like John Cornyn again? All, of course, depending on who the Democrats nominate, right? A Collin Allred, perhaps this former astronaut, who I find to be, I think anybody that hasn't been in office before automatically seems to be more of an appealing candidate than somebody who's tried to run and failed. Just might, I think that's certainly, if you're going to pick between who you get to choose from, right? Beto O'Rourke, who's run before, Collin Allred, who's run before, a former astronaut, right? Like that's, you could see the appeal on that. So, but either way, there's Texas in play. There's a poll out earlier last week, in Maine, that showed Susan Collins, who's up, her overall favorable rating was just in the toilet, right? She's got, the problem is she's not MAGA, so Republicans don't like her. And she's too Republican for Democrats to like her anymore, right? There was a time where, like, Lisa Murkowski gets favorable poll ratings from Democrats. Democrats in Alaska like her. So while she may be upside down with MAGA, she's right side up with essentially the rest of the electorate. Susan Collins has figured out how to make everybody mad. Kind of like a journalist who isn't a progressive or isn't a right winger, who somehow just sits there and you can somehow piss off the left and the right simultaneously. I think Susan Collins has pulled off that feat. You throw in the fact that she's been in office since the 20th century. She's been in the United States Senate since the last half of the 20th century. I think that's you've been in office. I think you throw that, you sprinkle a little bit of that ingredient into your race. You've been in office, again, more, she got elected in 96, I believe, to that Senate seat. So she's been there a very, very, very long time. So she seems vulnerable. So you throw her in there. So now you've got North Carolina, Maine for sure. I'm not fully on board Texas for the Democrats for what it's worth, but it's their best shot to win a Senate seat. I think better than the shot Beto O'Rourke ended up creating against Ted Cruz in 2018. That was one of those where the result was closer than anybody expected, but nobody bought it at the time. I think in this case, this race feels already more competitive than we thought that one would be. So that probably means more money gets thrown in early, et cetera. But then you have a few other places where you have some mature races. Joni Ernst does not look like a senator that, I told you this about a month ago, that I said I would bet that she's more likely not to seek reelection than to go with the Senate race, just sort of the way she's been behaving. And I have to tell you, I think the Tillis retirement, the likely now Cornyn retirement, John Cornyn has all but hinted at this. By the way, I wonder what this means for Bill Cassidy, but I don't put Louisiana into the competitive category no matter what happens there, for what it's worth. I think the state's just a bit too red. Maybe if John Bell Edwards ran, but even then I'm skeptical there. see Larry Hogan in Maryland in 2024. Popular governors who are ideologically on the wrong side of a state usually struggle to do that. I think swing state governors are different, which is why I think Cooper has a more than a boxer's chance in North Carolina. It's much different if you're already sort of a decidedly either red or blue state like that. But there's already three Democrats jumping into that race, and they're all three pretty good. At some point, two of them are probably going to have to drop out. Um, there's no, there is no sort of person that runs the Iowa party these days. But it does feel as if, but just the fact that there are good candidates deciding they want to get in, none of them seem to be super lefty. Obviously, if the Democrats nominated somebody that was a bit more friendly to, the ideology of Mamdani, or even Bernie Sanders, that might not be enough to win that state. Could get you a primary victory, right? And depending on how you run as a populist, are you a Democratic populist or are you a Democratic socialist populist, right? Perhaps that's going to be a new dividing line in primary politics. But you throw Iowa in there, you throw Texas in there, and that means, they're just searching for one other, right? If you really feel pretty good, and if the environment goes your way, you're going to win North Carolina and Maine, right? These are swing states, and they'll move in that direction. So the question is, where can they find where can they find you have an open seat in Alabama? I don't believe it. I don't buy it. You might see, you keep hearing chatter. Democrats are looking for a candidate in Alaska. Mary Peltola, who was the at-large member of the House who just lost, she's sitting out there. I think she would be a strong candidate. But I think Dan Sullivan, look, he's not Lisa Murkowski, but he's also somebody he's figured out how to be soft on. He's not a never Trumper, but he sort of has figured out how to vote Alaska first on that front. So, and it's been interesting. Sullivan and Murkowski together have made their votes necessary enough that there's all sorts of goodies that Senate Republicans have created to try to make sure they've kept their votes in there. If again, that's what Democrats have to do to pull off the Senate. They're going to have to, they've got the two obvious places in North Carolina and Maine. They've got to put 3 or 4 other states in place so that they win. All they need is one. And obviously if they got 2, there you have it. Right. But Alaska, and obviously there's the real secret majority maker there is if Lisa Murkowski decided to caucus with another one. There's the appointed senators in Florida and Ohio. Right. You have Marco Rubio's seat, J.D. Vance's seat. Ashley Moody is the Republican appointee in the Florida seat. Look, she has no name ID. Yeah, she's got a lot of work to do just to introduce herself. And you may have a fairly competitive governor's race. I'm more bullish on the governor's race for Democrats than I am in the Senate race there. But the fact that it's an unknown candidate, let's see. There's not exactly a lot of Democrats are jumping into either one of those races. Then, of course, you have the Ohio Senate race. Sherrod Brown, Tim Ryan, the last 2 Democratic nominees who ran better than expected in those 2 Senate races back-to-back in Ohio, but both lost, right? Do they jump in? Does a Sherrod Brown jump in with John Husted? Again, a guy who's, I don't think has the name ID yet, the former lieutenant governor, now appointed U.S. senator. But again, at this point, you just want to put the seat in play. And they might. They haven't gotten there in Kansas yet. Doesn't appear they're going to try. Democrats are going to try to put Kentucky in play. Andy Beshear would be the only reasonable Democrat they could recruit. And Andy Beshear is got his eyes on 2028 and the presidency. Mississippi is another state Democrats are searching for a candidate. Cindy Hyde-Smith only got 54% the first time. This is a state, Mississippi is a state that if Democrats put 5 years of voter registration work into it, by year 6, they could start possibly winning races there. But the party doesn't ever consistently invest in Mississippi. They only try to do it, sort of half in, half out. Nebraska, we know Dan Osborne is likely to run as an independent. That, we don't know what that could be. Pete Ricketts is running there. Maybe. I'm more bullish on Democrats pulling off Iowa than I am Nebraska. But Iowa, Nebraska, Kansas. I've told you about these 3 states before. All of them are getting hit hard by these AID cuts. All of them are going to get hit hard by the Medicaid cuts. So I think there's something there if they find the candidates on that front. And then after that, I don't buy Lindsey Graham this time. I don't think anybody's going to fool themselves there at this point. And that's the best they can hope for. Now, of course, Democrats are defending Michigan. They're having to defend Minnesota. They have to defend Georgia. You know, if you're going to win the Senate, they'd have to make sure they don't lose any of those. And obviously, I think Georgia's going to be the toughest one for them to hold. But hey, guess what? They're struggling to unite around a candidate, and the best candidate Republicans could have recruited, Brian Kemp, chose not to run. So here's the bottom line. This Thom Tillis retirement, especially if it's about, look, Susan Collins, John Cornyn is all but hinting at retirement. Susan Collins has the poll numbers of somebody that shouldn't run again. The fact of the matter is, I was pretty skeptical. There's been all this. There's a lot of people who waste a lot of time on Substack talking about these hypotheticals that somehow the Democrats may never win the Senate ever again, or they're going to get locked out 10 years because there's this mindset that somehow once a state becomes a red state, you can't find candidates to win it again. I will just tell you right now, whenever I hear that crap, I tune it out. And you should too. Fact is, every 2 years, politics can change, especially in some of these states that are very, so, nothing, the minute someone claims something with certainty in American politics, I promise you that conventional wisdom will get upended. So, look, it still is a uphill battle for Democrats to win the Senate in 2026. But here's the reality. They're in the game. They're basically, it's like the Indiana Pacers in Oklahoma City. You look on paper, it shouldn't have been close. But at the end of the day, this is at a minimum is going to be something that we're not sure about going into Election Day 2026.